And hello, welcome to the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. My name is John Galloway. I am a PM on the DevDiv community team. I'm joined by Daniel, Safia, and Mike. Welcome back, folks.
Hey!
Hi, everyone.
Howdy, folks.
So everyone here has been on quite a bit lately, and we're going to be talking about .NET 10 servers and server and API planning. Amazing. People are already saying, well, what is .NET 10 releasing already? No, it is not. We're planning it. This is the planning discussion, so don't you worry. I'm going to start with community links, just a few today. And here we go. And sharing. Okay, this is yes. Okay. So item 1 we have on the menu is just this link. I will put us over on the side here. So we not yet, but soon we're going to start streaming ASP.NET Core API reviews. Dan, do you want to talk about this a bit?
Yeah, so the .NET Core Library team, I think, has been doing this actually for quite a while, where they will stream the API review process that we do for any new API that we add to the framework. You know, when you're building a framework, you really want to make sure that you get those APIs right, because once they're in the framework, if you change them, then you risk breaking changes and disrupting existing apps. So we put a lot of thought and design and discussion into any API that gets added as public surface area. So the Core Libraries team has been doing this for a while on I think it's on the .NET Foundations channel. It's not on the .NET channel. It's on the .NET Foundations. And we would like to start doing that for ASP.NET Core as well. So the plan is next week, I think on Monday at 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Pacific time, we're going to try to do our first live stream of one of our API reviews. We'll see how that goes. I don't know. We may have to delay it a bit depending on whether or not we have enough people around. We have a number of folks who normally participate in these things that are currently on vacation. But that's the current plan, is to try to do the first one on Monday. And then every week thereafter, and you can participate. You join the stream. Feel free to ask questions, make suggestions as we discuss the future APIs for ASP.NET Core.
Awesome. Okay. We've got one other post. This one just went out this morning, like basically right as we started. Dan was working super hard on writing this up. So I will try and explain this. And then just like in the post editing process, Dan will correct me a bit. But so ASP.NET Core 2.1 has been, as of 2019, it was, gosh, okay. So there's ASP.NET Core ran on both .NET Core 2.1 and on .NET Framework.
Yes, ancient history of ASP.NET Core back in the day.
So it's still supported on .NET Framework because it's the last thing that runs on .NET Framework. I think that's correct.
A very old version of ASP.NET Core. So ASP.NET Core, originally 2.1, we had said we will continue to support that on .NET Framework, specifically to help people who are trying to migrate from .NET Framework to the modern .NET platform, like trying to get onto .NET 8, .NET 9. We continue to support running an older version of ASP.NET Core on .NET Framework to aid with that migration path. We had also shipped a ASP.NET Core 2.2 release, though, along with .NET Core 2.2. Now, we actually said that ended support like 5 years ago. I think it was like in 2019, I think was when that ended support.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the way those early versions of ASP.NET Core shipped, they were shipped just as NuGet packages. And so a bunch of 2.2 package versions showed up in NuGet for people who were running on .NET Framework. And some of them upgraded, not realizing that they were significantly shortening their support duration, the support lifecycle that they were on. So there's been a problem for a while. So in order to address this issue, we have decided to reship the ASP.NET Core 2.1 packages as 2.3, so that it's easier for people who somehow ended up on 2.2 to upgrade their packages instead of having to try to downgrade to a newer version, which is actually the supported version. So the 2.3 packages are actually literally the same code as what was in 2.1. So if you're on 2.1, you should also upgrade to 2.3, because that's what we're going to use for if any servicing patches that come up for that version of ASP.NET Core, we will base them on the 2.3 release. So if you're still got one of those apps kicking around, in the closet that's running on .NET Framework using an old version of aspnetcore, you should, we strongly encourage you to upgrade to 2.3, particularly if you're running it on the old 2.2 release, because that's been out of support actually for a long time, and we want to make sure you're in a supported case. So the blog post walks you through how to do that and the related concerns. Just FYI, if you have some of these older apps, if you're not on .NET Framework, like I'm guessing most people here are running their ASP.NET Core apps on, a modern supported version of .NET, whether it's .NET 8 or .NET 9, then you're good. Don't worry about this. This doesn't apply to you. This is just for people who happen to still have older apps running on .NET Framework with these older ASP.NET Core versions.
Awesome. Okay, cool. All right. Well, with that, I am done with community links. And we are ready to talk about server and APIs in .NET 10. So I'll turn it over to you folks.
Great. Mike, I think you're trying to speak to a muted mic.
Yeah.
Let there be Mike.
Okay. Does Mike have a mic now?
Mike, use the mic. There you go.
All right. Very good. Okay. So my name's Mike Kistler. I'm Principal Product Manager on ASP.NET. Been here a couple of times before, so I think you have seen my face here with Safia Abdalla, who's also principal in the engineering team. So we're going to talk today about servers and APIs and the planning discussion. So there we go. We've covered this in a couple of the recent sessions as well, so I'm going to try to go through this really quickly. But basically, we're in the planning phase now for .NET 10. And we have a lot of things that we do in this planning phase. We collect a lot of feedback from all kinds of sources. We look at the industry trends, and we try to identify some high-level themes of what things we want to do. We don't want to just have a mishmash of things that go into the release. We want to have sort of coherent, new, big features that are going in. So we try to collect those in themes. We've got a lot of the work already identified in our repo in the .NET 10 planning milestone. So you can use that little GitHub query there and go look at all those things. Those are things that we're looking at, that we're considering putting into .NET 10. We do a prioritization round. We try to estimate how big things are so that we make sure that we don't, bite off more than we can chew. And then we publish and share our roadmap. And we're going to get ready to publish that here pretty soon, probably in conjunction with the release of .NET 10 Preview 1, which is coming up in just a couple of weeks. Now, of course, when we publish that roadmap, that's just sort of our first stab. And we'll say, this is what we think that we're going to do. And as things go forward, we'll adjust and plan. And, it's the whole plan your work and work your plan. So that's basically the process. You can participate. We want you to participate. We want your feedback on these things. So there's lots of ways for you to participate. You can create issues for things that you know of that maybe haven't been raised yet, and bring them up to our attention so that we get those on the list. We can evaluate those. If things are already there, go and give them a thumbs up. We look at those thumbs up as well as other things, right? As a way of knowing what people think is important for us to be working on. You can do more than thumbs up. You can comment on issues. You can say specifically, I think this is important because of this, this, and this. This is happening in my app, whatever, right? And then you can go even further. If you have a specific idea of how to solve these problems, give us a design proposal. As we talked about at the top of the show, all the APIs go through an API review so that we make sure that we're doing the right thing. So we need to have concrete proposals for what those fixes are so that we know that we're doing the right thing. You can look at the design proposals that are out there and comment on those. Those get reviewed, and we're going to start to stream those soon, but you can comment on them offline so that we can consider those comments. you can collaborate on the implementation or the testing or the maintenance of any of these features. And we try to be clear about where that help might be best applied. We use labels on our issues like good first issue or help wanted or help candidate. Those are all great places for you to jump in and try to help. And we actually went through all of this in a session at the beginning of the year. Safia presented on contributing to the .NET, ASP.NET Core repo. So you can go back and you can watch that replay. She goes into great details about what you can do there. Now, we've already started. Preview 1 is coming out in a few weeks. It's actually already code complete. It's baked. We're just trying to make sure everything's right, but we're going to be shipping that here in a few weeks. So we've already got a number of features that we've added to that. One is in our OpenAPI support. We're now supporting the newest version of OpenAPI, OpenAPI 3.1, and that has a lot of nice features in it that will make your API descriptions more correct, more accurate in the way that they actually are represent what your application does. We added a capability on produces response type so that you could add a response description on that. A lot of people have asked for that. That's now in preview 1. We now let you produce your OpenAPI in YAML. Previously, it was only in JSON. Now you have the choice of doing it in either JSON or YAML. There were some bugs. Bugs happen. So we had some problems with some of the relative references and recursive schemas and things like that. I know that these caused some headaches for some people. We've gotten those prioritized, and we've got fixes in preview 1. Many of these are being backported into the first maintenance release of .NET 9. Handling range attribute values is another one. We removed the need for public partial class program for tests, and I don't know all the details on this. Safia, you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, so if you have done any sort of integration testing with the minimal host or with applications that use top-level statements, since we introduced those, you might be familiar with a bit of a hiccup when you try and use the web application factory type that we ship as part of our integration testing APIs. Thank you to the person who said it was nice. Anyway, the web application factory type takes a generic type that is a reference to the entry point for your application. The entry point for your application is usually your program class. And when you use top-level statements, that program class that the generator or that the compiler automatically generates has private or internal visibility by default. And so you find that in order to be able to access it from your test code, you might either have to configure internals visible to in your application assembly, which is kind of gross because you might not want to make all of your internal types visible to your test code. Another workaround that people might do is you can stick this public partial program declaration in your program CS, and that will kind of replace the visibility modifier that's generated by the compiler from internal to public. You kind of get the desired behavior. And we have unleashed a Scrooge upon the world because there's all sorts of sample apps that have this public partial class program declaration in them, and every time I see it, it gives me hives. So now you don't need to do that anymore, starting with .NET 10 preview 1. The way it works, it's just a source generator behind the scenes. We haven't changed the C# compiler in any way. Instead, there is a source generator that's shipped by default as part of the ASP.NET Shared Framework that will emit this public partial class program declaration for you so that you don't have to keep it around in your source code. There's also an analyzer that we ship in preview 1 that tries to discover any of these public partial class program declarations that might already be in your code and tell you, hey, you don't have to do this anymore since the framework will automatically generate it for you. So that's one kind of new analyzer warning you might see in .NET 10. So yeah, that's a pretty fun one. It was a quick and easy one to knock out, but one of those things where I kind of had to go through the phase of like, do we fix this in the compiler? Okay, what are the alternatives if we can? So on and so forth.
And sorry, one of the things that I wanted to mention here is that we talked about themes earlier, of trying to establish themes. And one of the themes that we have for the .NET 10 release is developer thrive. We're trying to find things that are currently, friction points for developers and address those. And this certainly falls into that category.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to highlight was the response description on produces response type attributes and whatnot. That was actually a community contribution. So a member of the community, Sander, took that through the API review process and the contribution process. So Mike, you were talking about kind of how you can engage with API design and contribution. This feature or enhancement that we're shipping in preview on is kind of an example of that. It's pretty neat.
Cool. I just wanted to mention for those people who are wondering about this .NET 10 preview 1 release, it hasn't released yet. So if you're looking for it and trying to figure out how to download and try out these new features, they're not available as a official release yet. You can get them as a like daily builds off of, I believe this the .NET SDK repo has access to those. Mm-hmm. But the official .NET 10 preview 1 release is coming up shortly. It's scheduled to happen later this month in February. I think February 18th is when it's expected to land.
I think so, yeah.
So look forward to that date to see the first official preview release of .NET 10. And then from then on, we'll have preview releases scheduled every month through to the final stable release in, again, November of 2025.
Yeah. I do want to ramble a little bit more about one of the things that's coming for preview 1 to build anticipation for it, because it's happening soon, which is OpenAPI 3.1 support. Full candid disclosure to those of us who are deep in the OpenAPI world. In order to bring 3.1 support to ASP.NET Core, we had to take in a major version upgrade of a dependency called OpenAPI.NET. If you're not familiar with OpenAPI.NET, it's an open source package that's made by some folks at Microsoft. It provides in-memory data model for representing an OpenAPI document, as well as serializers and deserializers for reading an OpenAPI document in JSON or YAML. So big part of like the underpinning for all of our OpenAPI stuff in the .NET ecosystem. Their OpenAPI.NET v2 is a major version that allows them to support OpenAPI 3.1. Where is some of the like pain and ickiness going to come in? It is a version that contains breaking changes, and some of these breaking changes will be visible to you as an end user, depending on how you're using the OpenAPI feature. We'll do our best to have those documented as we like work towards getting .NET 10 out in GA, but that is kind of just a heads up on that. It's I think Mike said it really nicely once that going from OpenAPI 3.0 to support to 3.1 seems like a minor version change, but it's actually a breaking change for a lot of things.
Yeah, and the biggest breaking change there, Safia, is the OpenAPI any support, right? Is that right?
Yes. So OpenAPI any was a interface and a set of interface implementations that was provided that was primarily used for representing things like examples and default values in your OpenAPI document. That has been deprecated in the v2 and replaced with a plain old JSON node, the type in the system text JSON library. That's a pretty big change if you're writing anything that will try and set examples for types in your API, or using APIs that set default values, you might encounter some breaking changes if you're interacting with that customization point.
All right. We've got some questions in the chat. I see one asking about integration of ASP.versioning with OpenAPI.
Yes. Mike, do you want to?
Sure, I guess so.
Yeah, sorry,
This is certainly something that's been on our radar screen. And in fact, we just went through adding a new API version to the eShop demo app. And it uses ASP.versioning for its versioning support. So we can confirm that the OpenAPI support does play nicely with ASP versioning. There are a few little glitches, but we got it to work. You can go look at the eShop repo, and you can see what we did to make it work. It should all be working fine.
Yep, I think probably the biggest issue there is the fact that you have to explicitly declare your API versions up front to get them to align with the OpenAPI documents that are generated and the version of the and the API versions that you're declaring via the library. So there are opportunities to make that experience better. But the cool thing about ASP versioning is it builds on the same intermediary components in aspnetcore that support all of the OpenAPI infrastructure. So there's not like major breaks there.
Yep. All right. So next up, some candidates that we have on our radar screen. We're working on input validation for minimal APIs. So currently, controller-based apps have the support for validation of parameters and request bodies and things like that. And we want to bring that same capability to minimal APIs. So that's one of the things that is pretty high on our list. We want to enable OpenAPI metadata for authentication providers. So when you declare that your app does a use authentication or use authorization, we want to be able to capture that, the metadata about that, and automatically inject that into the OpenAPI. That will make your OpenAPI much more descriptive, maybe make it callable by LLMs and so forth. We're doing some work on Kestrel memory pool enhancements to improve the stability and performance there. And we're also working on some system text JSON performance enhancements that we hope to have in a later preview. John, is there anything in the chat that maybe has come up here that we want to try and address?
No, I mean, maybe a funny comment here, but auth and minimal APIs is driving me insane, but that's because of me not knowing what I'm doing. All I can say is the same.
We talked about auth in the last 2 weeks ago community stand up, and there's certainly a lot of things that we're going to try to do there as well, including improve the documentation to make it more understandable for folks to know how to add it. All right. Let me keep going then. So we talked about that Developer Thrive or Delight Developers theme. So there's a number of other items here that are candidates that we really hope we're going to be able to put into .NET 10. Support for XML-based OpenAPI docs. This is where you would add XML comments into your application, and we would be able to pick those up and use those as additional metadata that goes into the OpenAPI document. Support for JSON patch without Newtonsoft.json. This is a very highly upvoted issue in the repo. So this is one that we're taking a hard look at. If you want to, chime in with your comments about this, go find the issue, put your sentiment in there on that. OpenAPI support for request delegate-based route handlers. This is a little scrape that certain ways of defining your endpoints in minimal APIs will work fine with OpenAPI, but there are some places where they don't. So So we're gonna see what we can do about that. We've had some requests to move the problem details class outside of ASP.NET Core because people want to use it from their client side and actually, inspect the response that comes back if it's a problem details response, and use that class to be able to access those fields. So if you're interested in this, please go find the issue, put a thumbs up or comment there. Open API support for typed results and controller-based apps. This is another little gap that we discovered as we were doing the Open API support that we would like to fill if we can. Improvements in API integration testing. This is an area that I think a lot of people would find welcome to make it easier to integration test your APIs. And improvements in build time Open API document generation. To make that easier for people to actually build their Open API at build time.
Cool. We got a few questions here. Let me see.
Okay.
Open API support in YAML, does that mean native YAML support? And I don't know if you just want to talk more about what the Open API YAML support is.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Safia.
I don't know what native YAML support, but I suppose I can describe the Open API in YAML feature a little bit more, which is the fact that currently by default, one of the ways that the built-in Open API feature works is it exposes an endpoint that will produce your Open API document in JSON. We have added support for another endpoint that you can query. So if you do something like OpenAPI/v1.yaml, you'll instead get your Open API document in YAML. So this is just about the way that the underlying, that in-memory Open API document that I was talking about earlier, it's just about the way that that gets serialized to you as an end user, depending on what endpoint you hit. It doesn't impact anything with respect to like YAML support or an ASP.NET Core or anything like that. It's just strictly Open API.
So maybe what they're asking, in the past when I've done YAML work with .NET, I've used I think YAML.NET. Do you know how we're actually serializing the YAML?
Yeah, so I believe that the YAML library that the OpenAPI.NET folks are using is Sharp YAML, if I'm not wrong. So that is the dependency that gets used, and I believe it is just there for the deserialization aspect, so being able to read YAML. I just saw a really interesting question pop by that I'm kind of excited about.
Let's see.
But we'll keep going. So, and then the actual serialization, they emit the YAML code themselves as part of their writers. So the Sharp YAML will come in really only if you're reading the OpenAPI document in YAML. The serialization is handled by the OpenAPI.NET library directly.
Great. Okay. I'll go through them in the order we got them here. Any news related to AOT? And there's been some discussion in the stream about AOT in general. So if anyone wants to jump in here.
So the AOT support is really specific to minimal APIs. So in minimal APIs, you can create a minimal API app that's AOT enabled, and we should have all of the support there for that to be native AOT friendly. Now, I think there were a few things that we discovered where, for example, generating Open API in certain situations, causes some problems. Those are bugs. When we find them, we'll fix them. So if you find them, report them. But the AOT support is exclusive to minimal APIs.
Okay.
There
I
is
think beyond that,
also SignalR support for native AOT that we did get added in, I believe, in .NET 9. So it's
thank you.
A little bit beyond minimal APIs at this point. But there's no web UI native AOT stored currently. From the chat, it did look like the request was about having more minimal API native AOT support. So for folks that have been asking about that, I think it was Red Eye Developers was Jose Silva if you could tell us a little bit more about which gaps in minimal API native AOT support you're hoping get filled, that would be helpful.
Cool. All right, let's see. So the bullet point here is JSON patch without Newtonsoft JSON. So this is system text JSON then?
Correct.
Yep.
Okay. Let me see.
And I know we had some questions about that, right, Mike? Like that issue has quite a bit of community interaction, right? People asking for
it does, and we could use a little bit clearer signal on what people are really looking for there. So please, share your thoughts on that issue.
Like one of the questions I know we've been discussing is, and there's a bunch of reasons we can imagine why you might want system text JSON based JSON patch support instead of the Newtonsoft JSON support that we currently offer. One of the reasons we're wondering is do people just not want the third-party dependency? We do know that there are existing community libraries that already provide system text JSON support, system text JSON-based support for JSON patch that you could use today. And so we're actually wondering if it's even worthwhile for us to invest in it, given that there already are community packages. If using a third-party library like that is problematic, we'd love to know if that's the case for you, and we'd love to know why. Or if there are other reasons why you prefer a system text JSON-based version of JSON patch, please let us know what those reasons are. So at least we understand what the reasoning is behind the request.
Okay.
I think another total tangent is we were kind of curious too about interest in JSON patch and JSON merge patch, and which people are using. I don't believe we have support for JSON merge patch in the ASP.NET Core by default. So, and there's various preferences between the two. So that's kind of another angle to this, is which like patch spec people are more inclined to use for their applications.
All right. I think this might have been the question that you were interested in, Safia. This popped up.
Yes.
Minimal API syntax for Azure functions.
Yes. So there's a couple of different angles to this. I think one of the ideas that's been explored, and I've prototyped on it a little bit, is the idea of being able to use the minimal API map action syntax, like your map get and your map put and whatever, having that map to an HTTP trigger in Azure Functions. Azure Functions kind of has like a controller-esque API style where you declare classes and you use attributes to annotate something as like a trigger or function that needs to be invoked. So there's an idea out there about making it so that you can use the minimal API map action, kind of like Lambda-based style for declaring your APIs in Azure Functions. I don't know if there are issues in either the Azure Functions repos or the ASP.NET Core repos that people can thumbs up or +1. It's actually really cool to see that someone is interested in this outside of like the hypothetical, like technical in it. So yes, it is possible. Glad you're interested. I think we can figure out a better way to track how many people would like to be able to do this. But yeah.
Cool. Okay, let me see. Is there a good way of integration testing background workers? I like the out-of-the-box web application test host builder, but it works well only for APIs.
Interesting question.
Oh, Dan, you're muted.
Yeah.
Great feedback. I don't think we have anything specifically planned around that, and I don't know if there's any existing solution. That sounds like a good one to take to GitHub, open up a GitHub issue, and make the request.
Yeah. My one thought might be that Aspire's testing infrastructure might be a good scenario for this, especially if your background workers are interacting with something like a queue or a database to process tasks. Aspire's got an integration testing framework where you can like spin up your worker app and test it. it's not quite the exact same analogy as some of the stuff that we have for the application test host builder. But yeah, Aspire might be an interesting tool to use here.
Okay. All right. I think that's the main questions. Yeah. Cool.
All right. I think we're just about done with our content here. Just to sort of go through why maybe some of the issues that we're talking about here or that you see in the repo are things that won't get into .NET 10. We have to do a cost analysis to figure out how big, how much engineering resource is required to do some of these things. And sometimes it's just too much to either justify the value or to get into this particular release. It might be that we could do it, but then it would generate a lot of ongoing maintenance. And we want to avoid that. We want to try and make sure we can put our engineering effort toward delivering features wherever we can. It could be that it's just too much of an unknown right now, that we don't really know how to do it, or that it's not clear what the true requirement is. We might think the impact is low. We might think that some people really need something, but it's just a few people, and we could have a greater impact by putting our resources elsewhere, or we have competing priorities. So all these things are reasons why we might not prioritize issues. But again, we want to hear from you. We want to know when maybe you think we're not prioritizing something correctly. We'd also like you to help, right? If you have things that are particular pain points for you, jump in and do a design, or maybe offer an approach for an implementation, so that we can all benefit from that.
Awesome. Let me see. Okay, there's one question. I'm not totally sure about it, but maybe sparks a different question here too. This is, need a generic class to read and write CSV instead of YAML, please. And I guess I'm not sure how this applies, but maybe in the the YAML, like instead of JSON, for like, I'm wondering if that could be generic or something. Like if somebody wanted to write out their REST API write out their API description in a different format. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think officially the Open API spec only supports YAML and JSON as output formats. You can't really
right. I think this is asking for a sort of a different need, right? This is addressing a sort of a generic formatting class, right, and not specifically for Open API. And that's perhaps something that we could look at.
Yeah,
I think, I mean, if what the request here is for like a generic library for doing, CSV based parsing, just like it sounded like earlier there was at least a question, like, as part of doing the Open API support, did we add like generic YAML support to .NET? And I believe the answer for both of those is no. We haven't added libraries to the .NET platform for those things. I mean, as much as possible, like we tried to build the foundation for .NET to then enable an ecosystem of libraries that can then be built on top. In some cases, if a format is just so core to the platform that we feel like it needs to be part of the platform, we will pull it in, like JSON being an example of that. But for these types of formats like CSV, YAML, we really do look to people in the ecosystem, in the .NET community to fill those needs. And there are existing .NET libraries that can, of course, handle these formats. So we would encourage you to look at those.
As an example of one, there's this SEP, which I've seen a lot of activity on. And this one is, if you're doing CSV and .NET, this one is super high performance. So this is one I would recommend checking out. And as a great example of things that the community is doing, right? That's, not like we focus on building the core framework, and then people can build extensions and really focus cases on top of that. So cool. Wow. Okay. Let me see. I'm trying to think if there are other questions here.
I know there was a question in the chat about EF Core AOT support.
Yeah.
I pinged the EF Core folks separately while we were chatting. I believe the thinking for .NET, they have some initial experimental support for native AOT and precompiled queries, I believe, in EF Core that you can try out. I believe it's not currently stable yet. For .NET 10, it sounds like they're not expecting that they're going to be able to take that to become a stable feature. They have some other priorities that they're looking at. I think they're like doing a bunch of work right now in integrating EF Core with vector based databases, which are commonly used in like AI based apps when you want to do like retrieval augmented generation and semantic queries, those types of things. So I believe they're currently prioritizing that over the native AOT support. But if that's a scenario you care deeply about, then you should go to the EF Core repo and upvote the corresponding GitHub issues and let them know. But at least as far as I know right now, they're not expecting that they'll be able to make much progress there. They may make a little bit of progress in addressing some of the various analyzer warnings that currently still crop up when trying that.
Cool. Wow. Well, I mean, some good questions. This seems like really good stuff. I'm excited. I'm also like getting more than I expected in preview 1 already to get like OpenAPI 3.1 and stuff. That's exciting.
Safia has been very busy.
She didn't take December off, huh?
Well, I always feel, I guess another thing that doesn't ever get mentioned is, or it might not be like readily there for people is we shipped the previous version of .NET in November, and so in like the holiday period, it's usually a good opportunity to do like a lot of bug fixes and whatnot. So in addition to some of like the big features we mentioned, check out .NET 10 Preview 1 just to see like, hey, maybe that bug that I reported like 2 years ago randomly got fixed because one of the devs was bored and decided to take a stab at it. I know I went in and did a few of those. So yeah, Preview 1 usually has like a bunch of those kinds of things.
So one other thing that I'll mention, since we have a little time here, is we are trying to really go back through the backlog of issues and scrub to find things for this, delight developers area, to find things that are really causing a lot of friction. In the process of doing that, we might find things that we either think are fixed or we think are no longer really relevant, and we'll close them. Now, that doesn't mean we don't care about you. We care about you, but we think that maybe they're fixed, right? Or we think that it's really not an issue anymore. So if we close something and it was a mistake, and you say, "Oh, that's still a problem. We need you to look at this," just reopen it. Okay, just reopen it or open a new one and provide the context. We're just trying to clean up our backlog so that we can really see clearly what are the things that we need to go work on. So, be patient with us and work with us to help us make sure we have the right things in front of us.
For folks that are listening, if one of the goals of these discussions is this is not supposed to be the rollout of the roadmap, the fully committed list of things that we're doing for .NET 10, but the opportunity to have a discussion with all of you about what should be on the roadmap before we actually write it down. I mean, of course, once the roadmap gets published, it can change, it can evolve. We expect that we'll have the initial roadmap published probably later this month is the current thinking. We'll see. Fingers crossed that we'll get that done about the same time that we ship the first .NET 10 preview. But if there are things that aren't on the lists that you just saw that you're like, well, what about this? Like, now is a great time to raise them with us. We'd love to hear about them. So if there's anything missing that you think is also important, let us know. Put it in the chat. Let us hear about it.
So, in the chat right now is great for people watching later. File those as issues right on the ASP.NET Core repo is the best way to, because then we can track them. we do our best to kind of watch the chat. Every week we grab the live chat logs and stuff, and we watch that as well. But for our majority of viewers are after the fact. So, well, yep.
There are a couple of questions I saw. There was one question about the data caching and our caching story. I know that one thing we've been working on is the new hybrid cache API, which is really part of the like Microsoft Extensions set of APIs, and that is still in the works. I think it hasn't shipped a stable release yet. We had thought that it would ship a stable release early this year. I think there is still some discussion now about whether they want to delay that a little bit or not. I don't have the latest updates there, but it is still being worked on and is still expected to ship. It's just a question of when. So if you're curious about the latest updates on that, I would go to GitHub, query for the just search for hybrid cache related issues. I'm sure Mark is watching those closely. You can ping and try and get the latest status updates.
It is available as a NuGet package, right? So I mean it
is available in preview form. The stable release I think is still pending.
Got it. There was another question Safia pointed out to me here. This when will interceptors stop being experimental?
Yeah, so this is the interceptors compiler feature that came out in .NET 8. It's used pretty extensively in a variety of like ASP.NET Core and .NET source generators. The request delegate generator, which brings native AOT support for minimal APIs, is the one example that comes to mind that I've touched the most. So that's the context for it. It has stopped being experimental. I think as of a few months ago. We didn't throw a big party for it, which maybe we should have, but it is no longer experimental. You'll see a couple of changes if you're using it. You no longer need to use the preview like experimental package pragma thingy. Wow, I know C# and what I'm talking about. There's a variety of aspects of the API where you no longer need to mark it as experimental or preview in order to use it. So that has already happened.
I just have to call this out. This is a deep cut here. This is from experimental esoteric languages. There's an esoteric language that has the come from operator, which is intended as a joke, but interceptors basically gets us there. Instead of go to, come from. Let me see. Improvements for Blazor WASM authentication. So we're completely off script now. We're taking random questions because I think we're a bit early. So
that's fine.
Yeah,
that's fine. I don't. I can. So there are a number of things in this space that we are looking at. Let me try and page back in. So one is that for OpenID Connect based authentication flows, we currently rely on a library called OIDC Client.js, which was originally built by our friends at Duende, who built the Duende Identity Server. That library has since been archived, so we are basically maintaining that copy of the library ourselves as part of that component. So we are looking at whether or not we want to switch to a different implementation is one thing we're looking at in this space. And I know there are a number of smaller features and things that we don't currently expose well for Blazor WebAssembly apps in the authentication space for that scenario that we are evaluating if we want to surface some of those things. I'm trying to think what else there is there. There was a request to try and decouple how the persistence and the authentication piece and the user state persistence parts of the Blazor WebAssembly authentication flow. I'm guessing we're not probably going to get to that in .NET 10. The original request was from a while back when I think some members from the community were looking at potentially doing a .NET-based implementation of the OIDC flow that required that separation, but I think they've kind of pulled away from that. So we're thinking that it's not as urgent to do that work. Am I missing any others, Mike? I know that you've looked in this space as well. There are a number of issues kicking around. certainly docs and some minor feature improvements in this space is what we're planning to do. If there are specific issues you care about, give them a thumbs up on the original post, or if they haven't been opened, open them, and feel free to mention me or Mike, and we'll take a look at them.
Awesome. Well, I think
there was one other question. I will go ahead and take. Someone asked about XAML and Blazor.
Oh yeah, okay.
We could go ahead and talk to that. So I'm guessing what this question is about is with Blazor. Blazor is based on HTML, CSS, and then C#. And Blazor is built on top of a .NET runtime that's built on WebAssembly, so you can run your .NET code in a browser. XAML is a markup language for defining user interfaces that's often used in like native client applications like .NET MAUI or WPF, those are the two major ones these days. We have no plans to build a XAML-based UI abstraction that would run on .NET on WebAssembly ourselves. Even I think .NET MAUI, which technically could take its XAML abstractions and get them working in a browser, I don't think they have any immediate plans to try and take that on. That said, there are a number of open source community projects that have already done this. For like the WinUI, that's the other one. WinUI is also a XAML-based application model. The Uno folks have basically a cross-platform implementation of the WinUI XAML model that they do absolutely support on the same .NET WebAssembly runtime that we use for Blazor. So that's one way to get XAML running in a browser. OpenSilver is a port of the old Silverlight programming model that has been redone on top of the same .NET WebAssembly runtime that you can use to build Silverlight style apps in a browser. So that's also available. And then I think also Avalonia has like I think basically supports the WPF style XAML programming model in browsers. So there are ways to do this. There are options from the community and the ecosystem for building XAML style apps that will run on WebAssembly. But for Blazor, our focus is on HTML and CSS. We're keeping with the HTML as the model for how you define your UI.
Nice. Okay. All right. I think that was about all the questions. Yep. Okay. Wow, this was great. A lot of great stuff. Again, I'm super excited to see preview 1 actually get to play with. Normally I'm like preview 1, what's it's like it's out the door, but no, starting strong. So
look for the upcoming .NET 10 preview 1 release. Also look for our roadmap will be published soon. I mean, there's already a GitHub issue that's there as a placeholder at aka.ms/aspnet/roadmap. We'll be filling in that content in the month ahead. So, keep pinging it every now and then to see when the issues start showing up. And then there'll be, of course, the discussions that are available on the GitHub discussions on the aspnetcore repo for any discussions related to that roadmap and our current plans. As we mentioned earlier, we adjust the roadmap based on feedback and as the release progresses, as we learn more about how much things cost and as priorities shift and so on. So that's where you can take those additional discussions.
Okay. And I think in our continuing kind of series, I think next week we are doing an upgrading from .NET 9 or upgrading to .NET 9.
Mm.
I think.
I was going to say to what?
Right. Come on, to preview 1. Let's get out there.
Yes.
So I forget. Dan and I Dan was very productive in December, and we did a whole roadmap for all these. So if our ASP.NET stand-up seem very organized, it is because they are very organized.
Nice.
Yep. Next week is the upgrading to .NET 9 stand-up, and then the one after that, I believe we have the Razor tooling folks. They'll be coming on to talk about the latest Razor tooling improvements.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Well, with that, I'll play us out, and I will give you 3 minutes back, as I like to say. All right. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, good.